So today's reading is from The Good Enough Life by Avram Alpert. Ideals of greatness cut across the American political spectrum. Supporters of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, believers in Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump's Make America Great Again, for instance, may find themselves at odds, but their differences lie in the vision of what constitutes greatness, not whether greatness itself is a worthy goal. In both cases, and in most any iteration of America's idea of itself, it is. The desire for greatness also unites the diverse philosophical camps of Western ethics. Aristotle called for practicing the highest virtue. Kant believed in an ethical rule so stringent, not even he thought it was achievable by mortals. Bentham's utilitarianism is about maximizing happiness. Marx sought the great world for all. Modern-day libertarians will stop at nothing to increase personal freedom and profit. These differences surely matter, but while the definition of greatness changes, greatness itself is sought by each in his own way. Swimming against the tide of greatness is a counter-history of ethics embodied by schools of thought as diverse as Buddhism, Romanticism, and psychoanalysis. It is by borrowing from D.W. Winnicott, an important figure in the development of psychoanalysis, that we get perhaps the best name for this other ethics, the good enough life. In his book, Playing in Reality, Winnicott wrote about what he called the good enough mother. We all know we need to work on that one if you're a mother, right? This mother is good enough, not in the sense that she is adequate or average, but that she manages a difficult task, initiating the infant into a world in which he or she will feel both cared for and ready to deal with life's endless frustrations. To be fully become good enough is to grow up in a world that is itself good enough, that is as full of care and love as it is suffering and frustration. From Buddhism and Romanticism, we can get a fuller picture of what such a good enough world could be like. Buddhism offers a criticism of the caste system and the idea that some people have to live lives of servitude in order to ensure the greatness of others. It posits instead the idea of the middle path, a life that is neither excessively materialistic nor too ascetic. And some Buddhist thinkers, such as the 6th century Persian Chinese monk Zhang, even insist that this middle life, this good enough life world, but this good enough life is the birthright not only of all humans, but also of all of nature as well. In this radical vision of the good enough life, our task is not to make the perfect human society, but rather a good enough world in which each of us has sufficient, but never too many resources to handle our encounters with the inevitable sufferings of a world full of chance and complexity. The Romantic poets and philosophers extend this vision of good enoughness to embrace what they would call the ordinary, or the everyday. This does not refer to the everyday annoyances or anxieties we experience, but the fact that within what is most ordinary, most basic, and most familiar, we might find a delight unimaginable if we find meaning only in greatness. The anti-heroic sentiment is well expressed by George Eliot at the end of her novel Middlemarch. Quote, that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been, is half owing to the number who live faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. And its legacy is attested to in the poem Famous by Naomi Shihab Nye. I want to be famous to shuffling men who smile while crossing streets, sticky children in grocery lines, famous as the one who smiled back. Being good enough is not easy. It takes a tremendous amount of work to smile purely while waiting exhausted in a grocery line, or to be good enough to loved ones to both support them and allow them to experience frustration. And it remains to be seen if we as a society can establish a good enough relation to one another, where individuals and nations do not strive for their unique greatness, but rather work together to create the conditions of decency necessary for all. Achieving this will also require us to develop a good enough relation to our natural world, one in which we recognize both the abundance and the limitations of the planet we share with infinite other life forms, each seeking its own path toward good enoughness. If we do manage any of these things, it will not be because we have achieved greatness, but because we have recognized that none of them are achievable until greatness itself is forgotten.
So as I'm pretty sure you've already heard me say, I have 3 kids, all boys. They're not here today. They're at their mom's church today. But 3 kids, all boys, ages 8 to 11. Some of you have already seen them around here and been their teachers and RE and all sorts of things. I want to start by saying I am not one of those parents who relates everything in life to parenting. But I'm definitely starting with a parenting thing today, so bear with me. I'm almost certain that whether it's parenting or something else in your life, you have something in your life that is relatable to this, so stay with me. So some years ago, when Kristen and I were parents of very young children, babies and toddlers, we read and heard a lot of advice about parenting, including a lot about parenting styles. Now, there's one that gets a lot of attention, at least in some of the circles I run in, called attachment parenting. You've probably heard of this, in which a parent and infant promote their relationship by giving high attention and lots of physical contact, like all day long, basically. Though we loved holding our babies, we were pretty sure that that style was not us. We heard about other parenting styles. There was authoritative, or free range, or permissive, or even uninvolved, which is not so much a style as a non-style, I think, but none of those sounded exactly like who we were or who we wanted to be. And we finally started joking in the sort of joke that is probably only funny to people who are badly sleep-deprived from caring for infants, but that our parenting style was good enough. Did he eat something today? Good enough. Are the clothes he's in relatively clean? Good enough. Is he a month or 2 late for his checkup, but at least he's going finally? That's probably good enough too. Maybe you get the idea. We were doing our best while being really tired, first-time parents, working demanding jobs at the same time as so many of us do. And you know what? We're more than a decade in now, and so far it's been good enough. Though I have to say there were moments, especially during the pandemic, when we had 4 children at that time because one of my nephews was staying with us. Having that many people in my household all the time tested whether I was good enough a few times. So for you, the details may be very different, but I imagine that out of these unprecedented times, many of us have felt like we're not even doing good enough, whether that is at home or at work or with our families, keeping the house or apartment in order, whatever. That no matter how much we try, no matter what we do, no matter what we do accomplish, no matter what support we have, it's just not quite enough. And that we are somehow failing both ourselves and everyone else all at the same time. And I know that this is compounded by the things the world tells us, usually not directly, it's usually a little more subtle that. We hear messages about how great we should be all the time, or at least if we're failing greatness ourselves, as we do all the time, we should spend much of our time appreciating the greatness of others and envying it, right? I thought about this at the last Olympics and then again this week as I watched some of the World Track and Field Championships. Maybe y'all caught some highlights too, I don't know. I am not, and at this point in my life, will never be an Olympic caliber athlete. But in my previous career in newspapers, I met and interviewed a number of such people who were at or at least very close to that level. And I've also known a lot of good and mediocre and just plain bad athletes who had a lot of fun playing sports. And the thing I thought about, and I've thought about this before, but it hit me again, is what must it feel like to finish 4th at the Olympics? Because you're the 4th best, for instance, 100-meter runner in the entire world. And because you finished 4th, you probably feel like a failure. Because there's only 3 medals they give out, right? There's no 4th place medal at the Olympics. But consider, what if you were the 4th best surgeon or lawyer or cook or preacher or teacher or almost anything else on the planet? I would feel amazing. I would literally tell everyone I know constantly if I was the 4th best anything in the world. And what if that's true? What if each of us is the 4th or 1st or 2nd or 3rd or even 1,000th or 10,000th best at something, however small or particular or peculiar? Speaking of the Olympics again, I used to joke that if there were an Olympics for doing things while holding a sleeping baby in one arm, I really felt like I could at least medal. Because my youngest would not do anything except scream unless he was being held for about the first 3 months of his life. Maybe you're the 4th best at using your turn signal every time. Maybe you're the silver medalist in finding that one thing you need from the fridge at the right moment. Maybe you are the best drawer of 3-eyed, scaled, iridescent monsters on this planet. And so our reading today, which is a little dense, I know it's probably a little hard to follow just hearing it once, is from an essay by Avram Alpert. And you can find it online, so I recommend looking it up later if you're interested in reading it again. Anyway, he talks about a very important truth, that in the everyday, the ordinary, the unspecial moments, there is a different type of greatness, though we might not want to use that word. We might call it beauty or meaning to be found. In our everyday lives, the thing we do in the course of our normal life, while we barely notice, there is a beauty that we can discover. I've talked before, though not yet here, about one of these such moments for me, which happened at the top of Enchanted Rock. I'll talk about it again in the future, I'm sure, but Enchanted Rock is a state park, but named for a giant mountain of pink granite located in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. The setting is really spectacular. It's this huge dome of pink rock. And the moment that got me was after I had climbed to the top of it, which is not an easy climb, but not a particularly difficult one either. And on top of the rock, it's not, of course, a perfect dome, right? There are little spots and divots and stuff. And on top of it, there are a number of divots that have collected water and dirt, and a few of them, weirdly, even have grass and very small trees. And some of these little pondlets, whatever you want to call them, have little tadpole or small fish in them. And the thing I've always wondered is, how did the fish get up there? There is no stream other than 1,500 feet below. I don't know. There must be an explanation. A bird dropped them there. I don't know what. But anyway, I was sitting there, And it's actually really nice because even when Texas is unbearably hot, up there's enough breeze that it feels better. And just pondering this tiny, ordinary moment. Perhaps you've had a moment like that in your own life. So I don't ever expect to win any parenting awards, again, unless they offer them in the Baby in One Hand Olympics at some point. And that's okay. I don't imagine either that I'm anywhere near the very best ministers on the planet, because I know several hundred of them, and I know that there's a lot that are better than me. They're really good. And I don't say that to be self-deprecating. It's just true. And I think I'm a pretty fair writer. I was a journalist, and I did win a few awards at that, but I knew much better reporters and writers than I was, and I'm okay with that. I want to be good, but I'm not actually sure that I want to be great. I've been around people who are really great at what they did, incredible, and a lot of greatness takes the kind and level of sacrifice that I'm not interested in, certainly not at this point in my life. I want to spend time with my family. I want to enjoy the little things. I want to be a good minister. I want to watch college football. And as our reading put it today, being good enough is both worthy and not easy. As Alpert says, and I quote, "It takes a tremendous amount of work to smile purely while waiting exhausted in the grocery line, or to be good enough to loved ones to both support them and allow them to experience frustration." That is parenting in a nutshell to me. Part of my biggest growth has been allowing my children to fail at things that I absolutely know they will fail at. The child who I know cannot successfully pour milk into a glass without making a gigantic mess, despite me saying over and over again ways they could make it easier on themselves to do this. I know that eventually he will get there. He will figure it out, which is not to say he will never spill milk again, but that it will be much less and less often, at least. So for me and for all of us, for the congregation and community and world that we are a part of, good enough is still a work in progress. It's become clear to me that though we might differ on the reasons and the solution, we're not done trying to make the world better in places both far away and close to home. In my home, I struggle with whether I'm doing good enough as a husband and father, as a homeowner. Maybe you have your own struggles, whether they're in those or very different areas. So here's what I, your minister, a religious official, am here to tell you. You are good enough. And the trick, as it is with my son, is to try and to fail and to try again in order to live up to that good enough. And it takes effort and commitment. And I think it takes support. I think it's hard to be good enough, perhaps impossible to be good enough by yourself. With the help and support and cheering on of others, though, perhaps we can be, and we can bounce back from those times when we aren't good enough. Our congregation, both this one and all of our sibling congregations, can be good enough too. I know that there is disappointment, perhaps, or maybe the emotion is different for you, that we don't do everything we once did, or that something isn't happening, or it isn't happening the way it should be. Even as we know that it's impossible to do everything, and certainly impossible to do everything well. But I also know that good enough is good enough, and that in some ways we have improved. We've found new and interesting and accessible ways to do congregational life. So when this pandemic ends, if ends has any meaning to it at this point, so perhaps I should say at least further quiets to the point where more and more is possible in our lives, I know that we're not going to lose the things we have gained in this time. Hello to our online viewers once again. One of the things I'm thinking about we've gained. And especially the knowledge that we can be connected across vast spaces and in new ways. So each of us is good enough, and together we're good enough too. And so as we continue together to face challenges in coming weeks, months, and years, I ask you to remember that you are good enough and that we are good enough together. May it be so.